The pilot of the Airbus A330 flying over the Atlantic Ocean in the dead of night suddenly realized that the plane had run out of fuel. The lights flickered off and the engines fell silent. The plane began to descend in the pitch blackness, and the pilot knew they were in trouble. As the pilot struggled to keep the Airbus A330 afloat, the oxygen mask suddenly dropped from the ceiling, signaling to the passengers and crew that they needed to put them on immediately. With the lights out and the engines silent, the plane was rapidly losing altitude as it descended towards the ocean below. The pilots knew they had to act quickly to try to find a solution before it was too late. As the pilot fought to regain control of the Airbus A330, the flight attendants sprang into action, preparing the passengers for the possibility of an emergency ditching in the middle of the ocean. They calmly instructed the passengers to put on their life jackets and to brace for impact as the plane continued to descend. The passengers and crew knew that the next few moments would be crucial to their survival. This is the story of Air Transat Flight 236. August 23rd, 2001, 3:30 p.m. Earlier that day, a mother and child at Toronto's Pearson Airport boards a plane bound for Lisbon. They were looking forward to a sunny vacation. Along with them boarded 291 passengers and 13 crew members. None of the passengers or crew had any reason to suspect that they would be stuck in the middle of the ocean without any fuel. The A330 was a trusted and modern design. Air Transat had hired Captain Robert Pichet to command the plane despite him having been an ex-con. He was in a tough situation financially and had accepted a job to smuggle weed into the States on a small Cessna. He was caught and served 16 months in jail. His qualifications, however, matched the job with over 16,000 hours of flight experience, despite whatever mistakes he had made in the past. Co-piloting the aircraft was young First Officer Dick Dagger. Being 20 years younger than Robert and only about 5,000 hours under his belt, he was still well capable and properly trained by Air Transat to fly the aircraft. Having been given fuel and a green light for departure, the plane took off for its 7-hour flight across the pond at around 9 p.m. The mother and child settled in for the long flight along with the rest of the passengers. The aircraft was at a normal cruise height of 39,000 feet. At 5 in the morning, the young couple was fast asleep, and the plane was well past any point of return, right in the middle of the Atlantic. Suddenly, the pilot starts receiving error messages. Number 2 engine, oil pressure high, oil quantity low, oil temperature low. A first in either pilot's careers, and something that the manuals have no information about. The pilots reach for the radio to report the situation, not knowing what else to do. Canadian Aviation Hub in Mirabel, Quebec answers the call and tells them to stand by as they do some research. While the passengers slept, the pilots remained calm. 30 minutes pass and the error messages start to grow. The ICAS system indicates to the pilots that the fuel tank levels are not balanced. A fuel imbalance in the plane can cause disproportionate weight imbalance, so the pilots opened up the cross-feed valve, allowing the fuel tanks to be balanced out. 10 minutes pass and then all hell breaks loose. Warning, fuel quantity low. Without any options other than to land, the pilots check the maps. They're in the middle of the ocean. No way in hell they're making it to Europe now. They pick up on a small Portuguese island nearby and set course. They radio in their plan while fuel quantity continued to drop. The pilots remained focused on the problem at hand. They wondered how and why there could be a fuel leak. It just wasn't possible. They asked the flight attendant to look out the window at the wing to see if they could see liquid leaking out of the wing, but they came up short with no signs of leakage. The pilots concluded that the readings were misleading. They continued to monitor the situation, thinking their readings weren't true to the situation, but the flight attendants couldn't see that the right-hand engine was leaking fuel. Opening up the crossfeed valve was a mistake which now allowed for the left-hand wing fuel tank to leak out of the right engine, but the pilots didn't know. Inside the right engine, a pipe was ruptured due to the intense vibration. A hydraulic line wasn't stowed properly in the engine and had been rubbing against a fuel pipe ever so slightly for the entire flight, eventually causing the pipe to burst. Both oil and fuel were leaking. The warning messages were correct. The pilots remained calm, thinking the readings were erroneous. They followed procedure, running checklists and communicating with ATC. Fuel quantity continued to drop. By now, they had lost over 12 tons of fuel. Young First Officer Dick Dagger suggested carrying out the standard fuel leak procedure, which would mean descending down to 20,000 feet. Experienced Senior Officer Captain Robert declined, saying if there was a leak, they needed to stay high. They would need all the time they could get. Warning, right engine failure. Captain Robert fixes the cross-feed valve and throttles all the way up. He needed to climb as high as he could with the little fuel he had left. They radioed it in. It was then they truly realized their lives and the lives of over 300 people on board were in their hands. 240 kilometers away from the island and almost no fuel left, the pilots radioed in, "Mayday, Mayday, Mayday." The passengers are awake amongst the commotion as the pilot announced over the speaker that they were now in an emergency situation. Total electrical power loss. The lights go out. They had lost the other engine. A small fan drops out from beneath the fuselage. The ram air turbine, also known as the Rat, acts as a windmill generator to power only the most critical equipment. 120 kilometers until they get to the island, but were they high enough to glide that far? In the cabin, the passengers were putting on their oxygen masks and life jackets. Trying to land on the ocean was a death sentence. Even if they survived the impact, the cold would kill them of hypothermia. The plane glided along. In 15 minutes, they would be down either on the island or in the ocean. Even for an experienced pilot, this was an incredibly difficult situation, never mind the stakes. It was pitch black. Most systems were down. The hydraulic systems controlling the vertical stabilizer had failed. The stabilizer controls the yaw of the airplane, which was not going to make a big difference, but still the pilot needed all the help he could get. Wing spoilers weren't responding. With engines down, even if they made it to the island, there were no thrust reversers to slow down the airplane upon landing. On the island, the tower was flashing the runway lights on and off, praying the pilots could see it. They could, far off in the distance, in the middle of pitch black darkness all around. The passengers were told to assume a crash landing position, putting their hands on the top of the seat in front of them and tucking their head in between. The passengers breathed heavily. Nobody said a word. The pilot did the right thing by using his last fuel to climb because he could see now that they were going to make it to the island. But the glimmer of hope wasn't without its curse. They had overshot and were way too high in the air at 13,000 feet. They needed to be at 3,000. With everything depending on what would happen in the next few minutes, Captain Robert put his emotions aside and tackled the problem. He put the plane into a downward spiral in order to descend without losing distance to the island. To give Captain Robert a higher degree of control, young First Officer Dick Dagger lowered the landing gear and extended the slats at the front of the wings. However, as all pilots know, an increase in lift is also an increase in drag. As the plane began to spiral down, the passengers looked to the right to see the flashing runway lights and looked to the left to see absolute complete darkness. The plane took a full 360-degree turn, but it wasn't enough. They were still too high, but another full circle meant they would be too low. He banked left and right while continuing to descend to put some more distance between himself and the island. They could see more lights. Firemen, police, ambulances now lined up the runway. The island was preparing for the worst. They had one chance at this, no go-arounds. In the cockpit, the only thing that could be heard was young Dick Dagger calling out the airspeed and altitude. Captain Robert remained focused. The passengers heard a loud bang and they were jostled around. The plane had hit the runway hard, bursting 12 tires. They felt weightless for a split second and then another bang. The plane had bounced. No thrust reversers, no flaps, no anti-skid system. The plane was creating huge yellow sparks as it skid fast down the runway, and then finally the plane stopped. Large inflatable slides exploded into the air. The doors were open, and within 90 seconds everyone had evacuated the plane. Firemen were extinguishing fires almost immediately. The pilots had done it. They saved over 300 lives. They were heroes. But they had hard questions to answer. Why hadn't they trusted their readings? Why hadn't they followed procedure? Investigators found out the truth. A maintenance tech had replaced a part of the engine with a part that was meant for another plane. It pushed the hydraulic line to rub against the fuel pump. Excessive vibration caused it to rupture. The report condemned the pilots for not following procedure, but also hailed them as heroes. They were awarded the Superior Airmanship Award by the Air Airlines Pilots Association. Captain Robert had made his amends. In order to avoid this situation from happening again, Airbus upgraded the aircraft flight computer systems, and Air Transat provides additional training about this situation to its future pilots. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you'd like to see more of this type of content, please subscribe to the channel. Statistically, flying is still the safest way to travel, with occurrences like these hardly ever happening. And when they do, know that you're in good hands with pilots like Captain Robert Pichet and First Officer Dick Dagger.